Hey everybody, welcome to Transport Treehouse, the casual and candid conversation that Chelsea and I have with random people we meet on the street. That's a lie, that's not true. But let's get this party going because we have a great guest today. So everybody, Chelsea Sexton.
I'm not the guest.
She's not the
David
guest.
Patterson is the guest. And because we're lazy, we're going to start by making him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm David Patterson, and I am currently the North American representative for the Chademo Association. You may have heard a bit about me in my travels as working for chief engineer of Mitsubishi Motors and a little car that we tried in the United States called the I-Miev. And then I left Mitsubishi a couple of years ago to help Volkswagen and Audi with their little Dieselgate situation. But now I'm back in the EV, just a little problem. And I'm back in the EV space now very happily, helping to electrify transportation. And so here I am today to chat with Chelsea, one of my favorite people, and we always have some great conversations.
Aww. Typically humble.
Can I tell you?
I have to say first, the Russell's intro was a little bit apropos because you and I did literally meet on the street in Santa Monica in like 2007 or something, quite a while ago. Mitsubishi had just announced the I-Miev, and our first conversation at some random little alt fuel show in Santa Monica was all about how you were going to single-handedly bring the I-Miev to the US because Mitsubishi hadn't yet announced that. And my reaction was very much, I look forward to seeing that, but a little dubious. Cut to you running around with this little car saying everybody wants to see the I-Miev. I'm just the jackass that comes with it. And me including that in an article that set your company on fire. And all these years later, we're still friends. So thank you for that.
Yes.
So when Chelsea told me about you, David, I was very, very excited. And this could possibly come off as sarcastic or cynical, but it's not. I am one of how many ever there are, the huge I-Miev fan. The first time I got to drive it, I loved the car. I thought it was fantastic. I always wanted one. Chelsea got one, and I was immensely envious of her, especially because she had a really special one. But just like I thought it was a really great first step. It was a great car. So I don't know how many people come up to you and go, wow, the I-Miev was great. I'm one of the people that's going to say the I-Miev was a really cool car. It wasn't everything for everybody, but it was a really cool little car.
Well, thank you. I still feel that way. There's still one sitting out in my driveway.
Really?
I've had two, and I drove one for 80,000 miles, and now it's living the life up in Claremont, and it's a wonderful community for it because the guy's a professor and he tools around town in it, and it's just, that's what it was. It's a great city car. You know, you want to rip around town and throw it into any parking space to run errands. You jump out, you do it. You got enough room to put groceries and things into it. It drives good on the freeway. It was like the minimum requirements for a good little vehicle. And it still is. And there's a number of people, you're not the only one, Russell. There's a number of people, influential people that have driven the I-Miev, and they say, you know what, Dave, this is a good little car. And it truly is. The Japanese did a really good job on it.
It was ridiculously cheap. That was, I mean, one of the best, like, again, it wasn't everything for everybody. It didn't have Tesla range. It doesn't go that fast. It wasn't supposed to. It was a really great, reliable little electric car that wasn't a lot of money.
Well, if you look at some of the other cars that are out there, you look at the i3, looks amazingly a lot like an I-Miev. You look at the Bolt, very similar too. I wonder where they came up with some of those ideas and those packaging ideas. You know, they had a lot of really advanced concepts in that car. It just, like you said, it was a very simple car, intentionally simple car, didn't have all the bells and whistles with the other competitors. So it kind of paled in comparison in the marketplace, unfortunately. But
Yeah,
like
some of that was self-inflicted on Mitsubishi's part, but it was still a very cool little car. And horses especially liked it.
yes.
So inherently being the I-Miev champion and the Mitsubishi champion also made you the Chademo champion of the US long before you actually left Mitsubishi and joined Chademo. And so we wanted to chat today a little bit because Infrastructure Week, but also in light of Nissan announcing recently that they're going to move over for the US from Chademo to CCS. And even before that, you know, Hyundai and Kia
Time out there. That was just a huge leap that you made and not true.
Okay, tell me more.
Nissan has announced their Aria. I think I'm pronouncing that right. No one briefed me on the pronunciation of that. But they announced that they're going to go to CCS for that in the US and in Europe. Mm-hmm. But they are not changing, they are not made any decisions about any other cars. And the Leaf is still going to remain, they have said clearly that the Leaf is going to remain Chademo.
Okay, well that's a question I think has been on the table for many of the analysts and journalists and folks kind of following this. What do we think is going to happen with the Leaf in general, given the introduction of the Aria? I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that it will stick around. So, I mean, regardless of some of those details, that was part of the impetus for wanting to have this conversation, is sort of the sense of increased transition of automakers from Chademo to CCS in the US. We'll set aside the rest of the world right now, which is much bigger than us. And also even simple things like Electrify America and the other charging networks deploying a minimum of a minimum of Chademo connectors versus CCS. So, you know, in a site of 8 chargers and 16 ports, one of them is Chademo. And so the Leaf drivers and Mitsubishi drivers and folks for a while have been kind of frustrated with that scenario. So there's increasingly this conversation of what's going to happen with Chademo on the table. And I don't know anybody better to speak to that than you.
Well, thank you, Chelsea, because that's exactly what I can speak about, because Chademo is alive and very well. Chademo is a little quiet in the US. I was kind of in Germany for a while, taking care of some issues over there. But Chademo is still active in the United States and very active in the Far East. You may have heard that the big news for Chademo is working with the Chinese and the idea of the Chademo and the Choji standard. There's going to be a unification there, because in the whole purpose of Choji is to be compatible not only with Chademo, but CCS and GBT, and lead a pathway into the future that we may end up with one fast charging standard. And so Chademo is looking at this, and they are very supportive of this and moving forward. There was a major announcement last month in June that it was a joint announcement between Chademo organization and the Chinese to move forward with the Choji standard and compatibility with Chademo.
Mm-hmm. And so from a practical standpoint, so Chademo launched first, and TEPCO, massive utility in Japan, and several automakers kind of got together in the mid-2000s or so and said, let's get around one fast charging standard, and went forward with it before there was really any broad industry talk of a charging standard, because nobody else was really making EVs yet for this generation. And so that went forth, and then all of a sudden, the Americans and Germans kind of came along and went, no, we have this other thing, the CCS charging. And Tesla in the middle kind of went, but we want something that's pretty. And Elon walked around with the design standard that was literally his own hand for a long time, saying, you know, I want a connector that is no bigger than this, to all of his engineers. And so what they have is lovely to use and the drivers love it, but it doesn't work with anybody else either. So we're back in this situation that is very similar to the 90s of, inductive versus conductive and magnecharger versus AFCON, and the drivers are all frustrated. And I have never gotten a straight answer on why, even going back to a very specific conversation at Plugins 2000 something in San Antonio, and a picnic table full of engineers from American and German companies trying to tell me without telling me why CCS is better. And finally, one of them from a particular German company just looked at me and goes, there are 7 auto manufacturers that are in favor of this. That should be enough for you. At which point George Bellino, a GM veteran we all know and has since passed on, said, yeah, you don't know her very well. Tell me the truth. I mean, so what's the reality around the benefits of Chademo versus CCS? Does CCS do anything better that Chademo doesn't? Or are the drivers just in this like VHS beta not invented here pissing contest?
It's not even VHS versus beta pissing contest. It's
just a pissing contest.
It's two different flavors of vanilla. You know, I was in the middle of all this. I was on the SAE committee, and so I was in the middle of all these conversations. And there was one day that we met with all the CCS folks, and we had this big summit meeting, and we basically put the cards on the table, and we said, you know, the Chademo organization, like you said, Chelsea, in 2005, there was nothing. So we came up with Chademo.
Right.
And we came up with a solution that allowed closed loop control of charging, but most importantly, that the vehicle controls the charging. The vehicle tells the charger how much to charge the battery. So the charger doesn't have to be so smart to identify the vehicle, you know, by characteristics. The charger is kind of a dumb big beast that's sitting there, but has communications.
Mm-hmm.
The car communicates to the charger, tells the charger how fast to charge me and how to ramp it up, down and the car engineers can then control that to preserve the battery life. And so that was the whole concept behind that. Now we end up with CCS and Chademo, and Chademo and CCS, we're in this meeting and we said, hey, we'll work with you. We would like to come with a unified standard. Let's all work together to come up with a superior solution. And the CCS guys, in straight face, looked at me and the other representative from Chademo and said, oh, we have that. It's called CCS. And we started laughing. And it's like, you know, that's not good faith. That because CCS is not a technically superior solution. Actually, Chademo still is a technically superior solution. CCS still lacks bidirectionality. Bidirectionality meaning that you can, Chademo by design allows power to go into the vehicle and come out of the vehicle. CCS has been working on that for a long time and they still don't have that capability. So, you know, in that argument there, we could have said to them, well, the technical solution is, you know, Chademo is still, you know, 5 years developed, you know, superior to you and has all these different features that you do not have. That's all in the past. The point is now we have all these standards, but where are we going to go in the future? Especially when we start looking at trucks, and we look at higher power charging. How are we going to get there from here? Current CCS doesn't do that. Current Chademo doesn't do that. And so that's what we're looking at with the Choji standard, is we now have another opportunity to come up with a unified solution, not just for cars, but for trucks, medium duty and heavy duty trucks.
So, okay, but when you say for trucks, that it's more just the higher power category. I mean, there's nothing inherent about a truck or a bus or a street sweeper that couldn't use either a Chademo connector or CCS connector today. It's mostly about the duty cycle and the use case and therefore the power draw they need. And one of the arguments that's always been played by the CCS side is, oh, we can go faster because for the most part, Chademo was 50 and then 100, but now there's 400 and the Choji project goes toward 900 kilowatts. So many, many, many miles per charging minute, and that seems no longer the case. Is bidirectionality going to be similar at those kinds of speeds?
Can't tell you yet because we haven't crossed that bridge, but on the short list of things is bidirectionality. That's supposed to be something that's inherent in this new charging standard. Instead of a, well, we'll get to that later. It's something that's upfront, that's one of the primary things is we want to see that bidirectionality. Because especially when we start talking about trucks and buses, depending on their duty cycles, there is opportunities there for vehicle to grid or vehicle to
building at least.
Vehicle to X. Just choose a number. But with those big batteries and a robust charger, you can start to move a lot of power. And so there is an opportunity there to support the grid. And that's something that really hasn't been implemented in a light duty role as yet, because it just really, we lack the chargers, and the chargers themselves are too expensive at this point. And that's one of the other things is that Choji is looking at, is coming up with a economical charger that doesn't have significant IP, that's you're paying some company for their IP, that you're actually paying for hardware itself that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I mean, only the inside baseball folks would even remember this, but Mitsubishi and Nissan and Chademo itself sort of cut its teeth early on after Fukushima in Japan, using the cars to go in first and power Japanese homes for 2 or 3 days each. Even an I-Miev could supply that much power just to sort of get through emergent circumstances. And obviously the scale factor of such things in trucks and buses, besides longevity, is being able to do more of that resilience. And resilience is the new smart cities buzzword for all things related to emergency response. And even more recently in sort of these times, we're seeing things like school buses being sent into city centers just to serve Wi-Fi hotspots. But features that we would not have imagined deploying a vehicle for are now being used in creative ways, which to me only says more flexibility is a good thing on all of these fronts to enable whatever we need going forward.
Yeah, and so you can even see what you were just, the examples you were showing there is bidirectionality is important. That's why Mitsubishi put the Chademo port on the Outlander PHEV. The Outlander PHEV has that. Do people really think that they're going to use that to charge the vehicle? No, people aren't going to use that to charge the vehicle, but they can use it to take power off the vehicle. But hey, let me throw one more out for you. Have you looked in the trunk of a Mirai Toyota fuel cell vehicle? There's a Chademo port in there.
Yeah.
What's that Chademo port in there for? You're not going to get hydrogen out of a Chademo charger, but you could get electricity out of that fuel cell vehicle through that Chademo port. So when you start talking about what's the difference between Chademo and CCS, there's not a CCS port in there to do bidirectionality. That's a Chademo port. And so that's why Chademo is still a very viable charging standard, because it is an expansion beyond just charging a vehicle to add to those things, that resiliency factor. Like you said, the Japanese learned that lesson with Fukushima. They saw the value of having an alternate fuel base, and they started living that dream almost 10 years ago now and looking at that. And so that's why Chademo has now focused on that.
Yeah, and I mean, even now, I think of companies like Rivian, for example, but others, the newfound enthusiasm for overlanding and the van life. And I mean, to their credit, even Nissan has been playing pretty much the longest of any of the automakers wanting to talk about it, with their used batteries and repackaging them into everything from a briefcase size to a truck full of batteries that can be used as an accessory power source, whether for events or camping or whatever. So and especially that seems like a thing that Americans very much sort of resonate to. I know the Leaf drivers forever kept asking to buy, even at the $5,000 they were charging in Japan, the boxes that would enable the I-Miev or the Leaf to be bi-directional, because everybody on the East Coast has backup generators and everybody on the West Coast has experienced an earthquake. Like, whether recreationally or otherwise, many of us can imagine a use for this sort of thing, even without getting to truly vehicle to grid. Because the utilities all kind of blanch it, like, don't send this stuff back at the meter, but keep your own refrigerator going. What's the problem here? But it doesn't seem like automakers have generally seen a market for that outside of the really specific emergency response or the pilot program at an Air Force base.
But that's also, well, let me say this, there are a few automakers that also have a significant portable generator market that are really looking at bidirectionality from a battery pack. And it's interesting because
you can't possibly be thinking about Honda.
Couldn't be Honda.
It couldn't be Honda. Yeah.
No, not at all. But yeah, because they don't support Chademo anymore, by the way. But
they're just down the road from me. I'll put my mask on and go ask them.
We'll just leave that aside. They are still a Chademo member, by the way. They still are. Don't get me wrong.
Well, everyone's hedging their bets, I'd imagine.
But that's really, I think, where the whole market is. And that's back to our Nissan conversation. That's where Nissan is looking at. It's like, well, should we be going to CCS? Should we have a CCS port? Should we have a Chademo port? Which one's going to be installed more? How is it going to serve our customers? But, put my former automaker hat on. That's the bottom line of all of this, is what does the customer want? We can talk about all these wonderful technologies and uses and use cases and all this other stuff, but the guy who walks into the dealership, what's he going to see? And if you could see, for instance, in the Outlander PHEV, that there is a plug in the trunk that you could plug your blender in, but much more importantly, if your power goes down, you could plug your router or your computer or your cell phone in and charge it. Because that's what the utility companies are finding, that people want more than anything in a blackout. They don't want their refrigerator. They don't even necessarily want their heater. They want to be able to charge their cell phone. They want to be able to communicate. They want to have their internet. They want to have their Wi-Fi. If they can have communications, that's what they're looking for. And then you look at an electric vehicle. If you could take that electricity off that main battery for communications, that could last a week. So people haven't got to that point yet of sophistication with electric vehicles, but it's coming. It's slowly coming.
You know what? I don't know that it's people. I think it's the car companies haven't talked about this at all. 000. And San Diego is one of those communities in California that has, where our utility here, because of past fires, the utility will shut down entire sections of the county if the winds get high, so that if the lines go down, it doesn't start a fire, which means for 3 or 4 or 5 days at a crack, there are entire communities in rural San Diego that have no power. You want to see a line at Home Depot the day they shut down the power, and there's literally 24 people there buying generators with an H on them, oddly enough, that other company. But I mean, this is potentially a huge thing that nobody talks about. No one. You got to buy a home battery and connect it to your solar if you want to have any kind of independence from the grid.
Yes. But, we keep going there, because I've made this argument any number of times, that the customer, this is a technology, but when the power goes down, when Hurricane Sandy hit New York, people were going crazy on the internet asking, how do I get to my Prius battery so I can use my Prius battery to support my home? People want this kind of technology, but they don't want this technology when they walk into on a sunny day in Southern California to buy their car. It's a rainy, windy day.
That. But I still push back on so we're still in the scenario where most, we'll say automakers as a category, there's a little bit of variation, but generally speaking, most automakers don't really want to sell a lot of EVs and aren't marketing even the regular features, let alone all this extra cool little stuff. So, we hear about customers aren't asking for it, but they cannot ask for what they don't know is possible. And that has been a problem for 25 years. So, there still has to be some marketing created on the part of the industry that would expect to sell the thing but doesn't really want to sell the thing, and therefore it's inappropriate to blame consumers for not being sophisticated enough to ask for this really nerdy little thing that they could kind of have.
Now, Russell, did you see how I served up that softball for Chelsea and she hit it way over the fence?
You
Yeah,
know,
because we never had this. We haven't been having the same conversation.
Never have this conversation.
it was like watching an Olympic volleyball team in action. The set, the spike, it was glorious. It was.
Yeah, but you're no longer representing an automaker,
no,
so you can speak differently.
but that's absolutely true. But the thing that I think, but we're starting to live in a different world when you start looking at the ZEV mandate, and you see the numbers.
Your favorite.
It's been my favorite for a long time. Well, on both sides, Russell. In full disclosure, I started my career working for the Air Resources Board. I spent 8 years working there.
Wow.
I did a lot of work to support the ZEV mandate, but even at that time, they heard my criticisms of the ZEV mandate, of how it didn't make sense. They still hear my criticisms of how it doesn't make sense. But on the other side of it, it is the law of the land. And when you start looking at that, you start looking at the numbers of the vehicles that are going to have to be sold for automakers to be in compliance. We're going to start seeing that. My belief is car companies are really going to start changing their tune, because they're going to need to have these numbers of these cars to stay in business in half of the country. Because it's not just California.
Right.
What are we up to now, Chelsea? I try not to
13?
listen, to pay attention. 12
Yeah,
states?
like 14 or so carb states. And there's a couple more thinking about it now.
Yeah, and we're getting to the point that it's almost 50% of the population of the United States within those states. Meaning that if you have a car, if you want to sell cars in the United States, you have to comply with the ZEV mandate. And the days of being able to buy credits to be able to balance the books, those credits keep going up in value, and the amount of those
Tesla's
credits.
thankful for that.
Tesla's in the market. Elon loves ZEV credits because that's how he balanced his books for a long time.
And just did almost 500 million this last quarter.
Yeah, and it's funny because the car companies, just dislike, Elon getting into the market, but they're the ones who are now funding him.
Right. And always have. I mean, back in the day, Chrysler used to buy credits for a multiple of what they're selling them for now.
Yeah. Well, in September, you'll see the ZEV credit balances come out, and you can play the game that we all play and see who made what trade with who, and you can figure out the bottom line. But the point of this is, as you go out in 2022, 2023, the amount of vehicles that need to be sold to comply and the amount of credits that are going to be available, they don't match. And there's going to be a point that automakers are going to have to change their tune and actually get serious about selling cars. So
do you think this will naturally all just kind of take care of itself? Or do you see, especially in the US, because Europe and China and others have stronger regulation, whatever you think about the role of regulation in this, we're in this bit of limbo and have been for a few years of sort of the CARB side versus the EPA side, and several automakers have taken a half step back and just kind of like, we're going to wait and see how this goes before we do very much. So do you see an increasing role or a different role for regulation of any kind, but also for consumers to continue to weigh in, as they always have had to try to pull this market along and pull cars out of automakers versus the industry trying to create the market themselves? What happens next? What needs to happen next? What's not happening that should?
Well, I'll look at it, I say it this way. I don't see that the state of California is going to roll back the ZEV mandate in any way, at least by 2025. And On the other side is if you start looking at from my view, you look at the consumers, it's the consumers that want an electric car is a small niche right now. And part of that niche is exactly what this conversation was supposed to be about, is infrastructure. Is how many people are going to put up with the infrastructure that there is out there right now. There's a gas station on nearly every corner. And how many chargers are next to that gas station? How many chargers are sitting in the normal parking lot of pick a parking lot, any city in California as early adopters for electrical vehicles? You know, are we seeing 10% of those parking spaces with chargers? Are we seeing chargers everywhere you look? No. The average consumer, I believe, is not going to start buying electric vehicles until charging is literally under their noses. Because right now, people aren't going to look and say, you know, hey, there's a wonderful supercharger station that's hidden over there behind that building, and I'm going to go charge my car at it. That doesn't help the market. The average consumer doesn't want to do that. But you know, one step back, does the dealers themselves, do they want to sell these cars?
Right.
You know, is that playing into their business model too? So, you know, between how do I fuel my car versus the dealer saying, how do I make a nickel on selling this car? You know, remember, the dealer is the first customer of the OEMs.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If the dealer doesn't buy the car from the OEMs, he doesn't put it on sale in his showroom. The customer's never going to buy it. So you got to incentivize both of those people to move forward to buy cars.
Yeah, I actually put dealers ahead of infrastructure, but I mean, yeah, they rank in my hierarchy, like Maslow's hierarchy of barriers to EVs. Dealers are number 3 for me, and infrastructure and all of the other things come in parallel or behind that. Lack of product being number 1, and lack of marketing and awareness being number 2.
But Chelsea, I'll do this based on actual data and discussions with dealers. Remember, dealers are people. If they see EV chargers in parking lots, then they could say, hey, you know what? I might be able to sell a few of these things. But if they don't see chargers in the parking lots, they're going to go, why the hell is somebody going to buy this thing? Why would they buy this thing if they can never charge it? Hell with it. Let me sell some more pickup trucks.
Yeah, I get that. And I started my career at 17 selling cars in a dealer. So I can very much relate to how they work. At the same time, I think on one hand, we definitely need more charging. And hey, apparently GM and EVgo are going to add 2,700 to that number. At the same time, visibility is different than hardware. And so while certainly many places actually need more charging, part of what I think hinders us is that everyone's used to looking for a gas station and what that looks like in any sort of consistent way, even though they're differently branded. Chargers across brands look completely different. The same networks often use 3 or 4 hardware vendors. The signage is inconsistent, and even the wayfinding stuff, the electric vehicle at the next freeway off-ramp, is spotty at best because everyone has apps now. And so that's fine for EV drivers, but that's not fine for those that don't yet have EVs. So there's much more charging already out there in some places than most people, including those dealers, would know, because they're not used to what it looks like and they drive past it not knowing it's there. So it's a multi-layered problem that still goes back to the number 2 issue of awareness and education and marketing, and pick your high road term for it, but it's all the same at the end. Dealers definitely have to be incentivized, and that's a thorny issue by itself. We'll have to do another conversation about that. But yes, a lot of it is the super basic fact that they're never going to want to sell something that they're not comfortable with. It's training and familiarity and giving them as much experience with the vehicles themselves as for you to turn around and ask them to sell it to somebody in 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. But I promise that the vast majority of Mitsubishi salespeople didn't spend even a night with an I-Miev, or an Outlander for that matter, let alone longer than that. So the it's always this finger pointing thing between the dealers going, hey, we sell what we're paid to sell, and the automakers going, but they're independently owned. We have zero control here or influence, even though they're developing the training. And no one wants to kind of put on the big boy pants and go, all right, we got to put some cars on the road and let's realistically look at what is required for that. Yes, in hardware and spiffs and things like that, but also the cheap and cheerful ways of training and education and making people comfy with a product.
Well, but let's look at the one company that's been successful at doing that.
Yes.
Look what Tesla has done.
Yes.
And why has Tesla done that?
They have done it because they want to.
Because
we've already covered that most automakers don't, but there is literally zero about what Tesla does that any other automaker or dealer couldn't replicate.
Well, why did Tesla install superchargers?
As a marketing tactic.
Thank you very much.
Which is different than the dealer experience.
Sure.
But it sells cars.
Yes.
And so today's announcement of EVgo and General Motors, what does that tell you about GM?
That in 5 years they want to sell cars.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, that's actually a very good sign. And I've expected to see that from GM because they can look at they look at the numbers and they know to comply in 2025, they need to have customers that want to drive electric vehicles. And the only way that they're going to drive electric vehicles is if they see charging stations.
So what does that mean for Chademo? Where does Chademo go from here?
EVgo is a strong supporter of Chademo. They have been installing Chademo chargers since the beginning.
Yes. And there's the question right now is mainly for now what we'll call the legacy drivers. So we can assume Leaf continues to happen, but nobody knows exactly for sure what continues to happen with Leaf. And Nissan has backed off of Leaf in the last several years in terms of support and wanting to sell many of them in the US. So it's mostly a legacy driver conversation that is not unlike the original RAV drivers 10 years ago. Given that they are now a diminishing fraction of infrastructure out there, and there's not a lot of signs of that increasing, should they believe that tides will turn? Should they try to weigh in? What should they expect going forward? In the US, we'll just stick with the US for the moment, because I realize that elsewhere, Chademo is a very different thing. If you look at Japan Unplugged share, the Chademo dots block out the country of Japan. There's like 2.5 times in that tiny little country, all the Chademos that are here. Well, but there's a lot of Leaf drivers that are wondering.
Well, you have to look at it from another standpoint here, is that there's laws in many areas that require to support legacy electric vehicles. In the EU,
there's a settlement for at least one network provider.
Right, in the EU, but also in the United States, it is a lot. I've discussed this with many municipalities and states, that many of them say, hey, we can't pick between these, let's mandate them all. And I have this continued belief that it's going to look like a gas pump, that there's going to be 3 flavors of chargers on most every gas pump, every electric vehicle charging station in the United States for fast charging. That they're going to support all of these. That's why, to me, to start moving forward with the Choji plan, to look for a way to unify this in the future with backward compatibility makes some sense. Is we can't solve this problem today or tomorrow, especially because we have legacy drivers, but to be able to move forward to a unified solution, I think is crucial and important. But like I said, again, if that Leaf driver, that I-Miev driver, hey, I have a Chademo port, is it going to continue to be supported? Yes, and is being supported by regulation and law.
Yes, but practically speaking, it's not. 5 years ago, I completely agree. Like, we stopped trying to get automakers to unify around this pissing contest and mostly just went to the charging folks and went, okay, put one of each handle on all the chargers and it'll be fine. But increasingly, Chademo ports are not like gas pumps. They're trying to find diesel in a gasoline world from a ratio standpoint. It's 1 out of 16. It's not one of each on every charger anymore. And there's some regulation, but it's not terribly universal. I mean, there was a fight in New York because their recent regulation required CCS and Chademo, and everyone jumped in and said we should get rid of Chademo and make it Tesla because it's, from a market standpoint, it's more of a standard. So yes, there's some policy protection, but I don't know that it's universal enough to be confident in it. But I hear the point of like the future is how to move forward and unify. So it seems like there's two parallel paths. One is some protectionism of legacy drivers, but at the end of the day, moving forward with something that they may or may not be able to use. Is that right? Or is that, I mean, what are we missing?
Well, the thing that we're also missing too is the robustness of Chademo chargers versus the robustness of CCS chargers.
But they're kind of the same in a lot of cases now.
No, they're not. No.
Well,
no,
it's a BTC
not.
charger with one of each handle.
Let's just say it this way. There is a company out there that's putting a lot of CCS chargers in the ground because they have a lot of penalty money to spend, and their vehicles only use CCS. So yes, they are required to put a Chademo port in there, but I've also heard that company wants to be a for-profit company.
You can say Electrify America out loud.
So if they are going to be a for-profit company, they are pushing aside a significant market share from the beginning. So if I was looking to be a for-profit company, you know, I would kind of want to have all standards. I would like to sell electricity to all electric vehicles. I wouldn't be doing that, but everybody has their own business model for their own reasons.
So you would expect, and yes, that is a whole nother layered conversation. So you would expect that EVgo, for example, would be more equally ratioed than Electrify America, or ChargePoint for that matter. That, I mean, so you've made the example Electrify America, and because it's technically a Volkswagen company, the settlement requires them to support both, and they technically support both by putting one Chademo, but otherwise their argument is, look, aside from what our products used, most of the announced products upcoming are CCS, and so therefore, of course we are, because we are business-minded, as you say. So by that logic, EVgo and ChargePoint and the others would start to steer that direction of less 50-50, more weighted towards CCS. But by your logic, you're saying, no, they shouldn't do that if they want to be successful. They should stick more to something 50-50-ish or less obviously skewed.
Exactly. And I think that's what.
But how would they, what data would they be using to plan on that if Nissan has already said, at least this next big volume car is not going to be Chademo?
I'll just quote it this way. The Nissan's future is being speculated significantly by press and social media. I don't think that you've heard anything from Nissan about what the future of their fast charging standards are going to be in the United States. And I think that you would just wait to see what you're going to find out. Much more importantly is when you look at EVgo and ChargePoint, both of them are Chademo members, and both of them supply chargers with both kinds of charging ports.
Yeah.
That they want to sell electricity to EV drivers and support EV drivers. I bet you that if Tesla opened their standard up and allowed ChargePoint and EVgo and any number of other charging station providers to support Tesla vehicles, they would too. But Tesla has their own business reasons to keep that proprietary. So
both ChargePoint and EVgo have said the biggest bulk of a single model constituent of subscribers are Tesla. So they admit that that's a huge chunk of their business, even having to use adapters. So I agree with you. If they could put on Tesla connectors tomorrow, I'm sure they would.
yeah, well, put it this way, there is a big charging station right off the 580 up in San Francisco in Pleasanton. And I think that there's like 24 or 30 Tesla chargers there. And then there's a whole bunch, I think maybe 20 Electrify America chargers there. I sat there one night and for about an hour and a half and watched Tesla after Tesla come and go and get charged. I saw one car come into that Electrify America station looking to charge. And it was a Chademo car. The Chademo charger didn't work. That one charger, that one car went over to the EVgo charger on the other side of the mall to charge his vehicle. But what Tesla's doing is shows you have a car that's got a 200, 300 mile battery range, and they still depend on fast charging. So when people say the fast charging isn't important to sell cars, they're not paying attention. And so
it's important. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's important to sell cars.
That's why Chademo has been around. That's why Chademo started in the beginning with this back in 2005. How do you provide charging in a metropolitan area like Tokyo? And that's what they're continuing to do. And that's what they're going to continue. That's what's going to continue. Now, the configuration of the charger may or may not change, but the support for legacy vehicles is going to be highly important, because if the Air Resources Board and all the environmental agencies want to make progress using electric vehicles for climate change or whatever other purpose, you need those legacy vehicles, because that's much more than what's going to be sold every year in the dealerships. And so it's so important to support a legacy vehicle that like I said, that many municipalities, governments, provinces, the EU have mandated that you must support legacy vehicles.
So when I asked about the role of regulation and what needs to happen that may not already be happening, there is some mosaic of policy support and requirement of legacy vehicle support, but maybe more of that needs to happen and more universally. And from a driver perspective, I'll say that one of the fights they've been fighting with folks like Electrify America, but not only, is redundancy. That one of the things that Tesla did, among others, really well with the supercharger network was the fact that there was multiple chargers. So if any one of them broke, they were not, sort of shit out of luck. If you go to a station, regardless of brand, and there's only one Chademo connector, and either the connector's not working or the charger's broken or whatever, they're back to that. So many of them are in the camp of trying to go, look, we don't need half, we just need two, we need a backup. And so from a policy perspective, it seems like there's some layers under support both that folks should be thinking about. Are there others besides two?
Chelsea, you're preaching to the choir here of a guy.
I know, but I'm trying to pull suggestions and intel out of you too. Like if you were talking to somebody making this decision, what do you tell them besides but two?
Yeah, well, you're talking to a guy that drove an I-Miev.
I know.
A nominal 40 to 60 mile range electric vehicle. I know a lot about, depending on, I have to charge my car here, otherwise I'm not getting home. So, the policy point of two, is important. I think that we're now entering a point where we're actually getting more sophisticated. I remember the days that we were looking at, I was dreaming of having 10 DC quick chargers in the Los Angeles basin to be able to get around. And I thought that was a wonderful thing if there was 10.
That's all we need.
But now we're talking about a more sophisticated market, that people are buying electric cars, that you go to a EVgo charging station that has 2 chargers and there's a line of 8 people waiting for those 2 chargers. Now, those chargers aren't broken, but now you're sitting in line for over an hour to be able to charge your vehicle. We're getting to a good point here of being able to say, yeah, there is now, with the legacy vehicles, there is a demand for public charging. Now it's a matter of how does somebody make a dollar creating public charging? Are you shocked, Russell?
Yeah, my dog just wanted to comment on that for some reason. I don't know why.
Oh, okay. No, because I think the dog's in agreement with me. Everybody is looking for a way. You know, I'm sure that if EVgo wanted to, if they could figure a way to make a dollar by putting 4 chargers into any of those locations, they would. But I think that they're still challenging to find an effective business model that's not dependent on government incentives to be able to be profitable.
For everybody.
I'm listening to all this and I'm learning a lot. It's really interesting. But I think there's a couple of things, I don't know, maybe we're missing. Maybe I'm just naive or not informed enough to have this opinion. I mean, let's be clear. Most charging, anybody who's owned an EV knows most charging happens at home. It doesn't matter how many chargers are out there. Most EV owners know most of the time they're filling up at home. And you can't do that with gas. I realize that's a common sort of Tesla fanboy thing, but I mean, it's a fundamentally different product. Chelsea's point of signage and visibility is huge because that plays into marketing. People don't want to think that the only place they can charge is at home. They want to think that if they go out and, I want to charge somewhere, I can. So it's really more about visibility than actual, at least numbers right now today. It's about telling people that you're going to, it's not, but you can't tell people. They have to know they have to see their neighbor. They have to know their uncle, their cousin, their brother, their dad, whatever, has to have a car. Because I saw the same thing in Prius. Prius was a freaky weird thing that nobody understood until everybody knew a Prius owner. And then it was like, well, dang, let's go buy one. I mean, it wasn't, the mystery was gone and it was simply an economic proposition, total cost of ownership. Where I'm going with this is, I think the dealer incentives are huge, getting the dealers on board somehow to selling electric cars, because most dealers don't. And the reason why Tesla sells their own cars is because they didn't want what 99% of the dealers do as soon as somebody comes in and wants an electric or a hybrid car. And we all know what that is. That's, hey, what they don't tell you is I'm getting a spiff on the F-150. You need an F-150, or you need an Altima, or you need a whatever it is. You need something else. Rather than even climb that mountain of trying to get them into an electric car, they immediately move them to a gas car. So getting the dealers behind them is important. Where am I going with all this? I don't know. I just wanted to say that. I don't think it's more than sophistication. Somebody, David, I think you used the word sophisticated market. And it's a matter of that visibility and giving people that comfort level. We don't necessarily need to deploy 5,000 other chargers in Metro LA. It wouldn't hurt, but it's not, a lot of those chargers would go unused.
And I think that's the more important point, not a matter of deciding this is what we need or don't in any particular place. I mean, Guidehouse, formerly Navigant, has their damp finger on the wind is sort of 66,000 public DC chargers by 2025. And we're probably around 18, 19, something like that right now. So obviously sort of a 3x expansion, but the key being to stay 1 or 2 steps of vehicle deployment, not 10, because stranded assets are indeed a problem, especially when they're publicly funded, whether that's taxpayer, ratepayer, or settlement. It's all kind of quasi-public. And so that balance of chicken and egg, and yes, we get it, and let's put in some charging and more signage is useful, but not to the point of putting stuff in that never gets used, mostly because companies are awarded contracts that are like, you put in X number by X date, doesn't really matter if they're useful to drivers. So more oversight and strings attached to wherever there are these publicly funded projects. But also, as GM or whoever gets involved, obviously we all tried hard to get details on some of that, but they're not going to be interested in funding Chademo. So the degree to which a company has, and because they won't say exactly what the investment, what the partnership looks like, who knows? It mostly looks like going after grant programs and utility programs, but they could influence that skew as well. So there's still the number of sort of drivers and enthusiasts and advocates and all those folks kind of sitting on the outside going, yeah, we understand all the realities, but we have some free time. We're all working from home. We're interested enough. I mean, we've seen Tesla drivers show up to all sorts of regulatory meetings. We've had EV drivers broadly showing up to CARB meetings for decades. To the extent that somebody wants to be supportive or weigh in or be helpful, what should they be doing, Dave? Or should they stay out of it? Is that not useful? Just sort of let the industry handle it.
Oh, I think that what needs to be done, I think Russell came up with the one important thing that he said. We've been talking all about fast charging, which to me is the important key for the top level of transportation. But I remember, and people have done the 3-segment pyramid. The basic fundamental to sell an electric vehicle is, can somebody charge at home? And if you can charge at home, then they're able to, hey, you can run an electric vehicle. I can drive my I-Miev around because I can charge at home, around town, level 2 charging all day long. I used to drive at 40 miles each direction up to Mitsubishi headquarters. Why? Because we had level 2 charging. My car sat in the parking lot for 10 hours a day. It was charged on the level 2 charger. Level 2 charger, level 2 charger. My point that I continue to make is not necessarily always about the importance of fast charging for benefits, but how about level 2 charging? How about how many parking spaces in the state of California or any of the ZEV mandate states, how many parking spaces actually have access to a level 2 charger? If you have level 2 charging, it's everywhere around. Now, we're not talking about a $50,000 charger or a $100,000 charger. We're talking about a $1,000 charger. It's now sitting, it becomes just an appliance that's sitting in a parking lot, in a parking garage. When people start seeing those everywhere, they say, you know what, I didn't know that we had one of those in my parking lot. I saw an apartment complex over here. They were advertising that they have EV charging. They have one level 2 charger for a complex of 500 apartments. One. That's EV charging? No. I say no. If people want to see, back to your question, if people want to see EVs, if the EV public wants to see EVs continue to increase, there needs to be level 2 charging. So that people, when their car is parked, they can plug it in, especially at multifamily residences and apartment complexes and other places that they don't have access to charging in their garage. Those are the people that now are going to consider an electric vehicle to be able to, hey, in my apartment complex, we have 1 out of 10 parking spaces have EV charging. I could have an EV charger. Look at Tesla, look at Google, what Google did. Google put in as many EV chargers as they could. Why? Because Googlers started asking for it. And they started seeing that people were able to drive their EVs and they could sit there at work and they could charge them. And then Google did the math and they said, why do I want this person to have to go out and move and share their charger and I'm losing a half hour of productivity out of that person? How much does that charger cost?
Right.
Well, that's that person's productivity for 2 days. Put in another charger and all of a sudden they have this beautiful networked charging system. And they have thousands of electric vehicles there at Google that are charged every day.
And that started back when people were converting their Priuses to plugins.
Yeah.
So I will say for you, primarily for your benefit, because I think you know from our years of friendship that I agree completely. We focused on DC a little bit because Chademo for this particular conversation, but we had Kitty on and it was all level 2 and some level 1, that even that has the right place, it has an application in the right place.
And
so
you,
yes,
and you know, full disclosure here, who supports Kitty?
we all support Kitty, but yes.
I am her treasurer. I am on her board of directors.
Oh,
Kitty is doing God's work.
She absolutely is. So yes, lest anybody think that because of this conversation we're fast charging focused, it is quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying at this point is level 2 is incredibly important. And what Kitty is doing is very important because she's plugging a gap that will never get plugged otherwise because of what she's doing. But if we are going to really move the needle, quick charging is very important, very, very important. But the basic bottom line is when they park in the parking lot, hey, I'd like to get to a point that you don't have to have an EV parking space because there's enough chargers. In Manitoba, they have block heaters.
Yeah,
And in public parking lots, they have plenty of plugs for everybody who comes to that Canadian Tire to go shopping for their block heaters. When we get to that point with EV charging, I think we might be moving the needle here.
Sure.
You don't get to retire anytime soon. That's what I'm hearing.
A friend of mine who's a huge petrol head relocated to San Diego, got a job with a major software company here. And for the first time in his life, he asked me, so EVs, really, should I be considering it? And I'm like, why? Went to his new job, parked his car, had to drive around for a little bit because they had so many dozens of EV spots. And he's like, if I can charge at work every day for free, then why wouldn't I want one? And I'm like, if you could charge at home for free every day, why wouldn't you want one? But anyway, at least, again, that's that visibility. It's that marketing that is every bit as important as, in some cases, what the actual capacity of the infrastructure is. Right. If you've got a huge infrastructure with enormous capacity, nobody knows about it, nobody can find it, it's mislabeled in the apps, who cares?
Exactly.
Or it's inconvenient, overly expensive, whatever.
Overly expensive. Yeah.
Our mantra is almost anymore, if users are not the focus, none of the companies involved are going to be successful. That's kind of all that matters. Even if it's an automaker buying your subscription or the site host that's paying you to be there, they're all looking to make the drivers happy in the end. So they have to be the focus. Well, we've kept you for over an hour, and I'm mindful of that. So I'm going to ask you one last little funky question, and then I'll turn it over to Russell for his. But because I know you have some specific experience and feelings about this person and company, have you heard Henrik Fisker's go in public again?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't. I wonder. I do see his design being here in Orange County. I do see continually. I see prototypes of Fiskers. They're now looking very, very old. But driving around.
That's the karma. He's got his own new little company now.
Oh, really?
So yes, the Fisker Ocean.
The Ocean.
And he's going to do solid state batteries, and he's going public sooner than later.
You shouldn't have said that when I was drinking.
Let me say this. He is a gifted vehicle designer.
I completely agree.
And I wish him all the best. I actually like him and talk to him about his cars. I wish him well because I think he's built some beautiful, beautiful cars, and I would like to see more beautiful cars on the road.
I think we all would.
Yeah. Only because we covered it last week on What Drives Us. We talked about the Aria. And with the same, is it Aria? Is it Aria? I don't know. And you may or may not have a personal opinion on this. You may not be allowed to express it. I don't know. I'm giving you some cover here, David. But my contention was the Leaf is gone. The Aria is going to replace it. And I base that on looking at what Toyota's done with, for instance, Prius V, getting rid of that as soon as RAV4 Hybrid came in and killed it in sales. I don't think there's a propensity for car companies to hang on to legacy electric cars at this point. It's still
And I
very
base it
much.
somewhat on all the Nissan EV support employees calling me looking for jobs in the last 6 months or so. And they were mostly told, yeah, we're getting rid of this field staff, and when the Aria comes out,
Yeah.
then maybe they'll reconsider.
See, I didn't know that. Why didn't I
Always little
ask you?
nuggets.
I should have asked you.
Proceed.
David, do you have anything to say about that, sir?
I don't know about their Nissan's product plan. I wouldn't draw, and the other thing is I wouldn't draw any parallel between Nissan and Toyota because they are radically different companies. They might be both in Japan, but they are quite different companies. I'm not surprised that Nissan is moving towards a crossover SUV.
Sure.
You go out into any parking lot anywhere, and after spending so much time in Europe, I'm just amazed at how many different flavors of crossover SUV there are and how popular they are with people. So I'm actually glad to see that there's starting to be EVs that are crossover SUVs, that they're starting to get into that market. I want to see EVs in many markets because that's the only way that the technology is going to be successful. If it's going to be
see an
a
electric
niche,
Evo?
they have dreamed of that. Oh, they dreamed of that.
I have dreamed of that.
They have talked about it many, many, many times. And trust me, there's many Mitsubishi engineers that have been pushing for that. That's, you know, you look at the technologies that are coming out of Formula One and other formulas that, you know, there's some interesting applications for electric drive. You know, that could be a lot of fun. And I think that's what we're going to start to see. But I have to say, you know, back to my you know, criticism of the ZEB mandate, because of the way the ZEB mandate is been built to emphasize 100% battery electric, they're missing a lot of really good technologies that could move the needle towards electric drive. So
yes,
I think we're going to keep seeing 100% battery EVs because that's where all the ZEV credits come from, and it's a credit game.
It's a separate topic, but we'll have to do something around a new advocacy group that's been going on for strong plug-in hybrids. So yes, there are some of us that agree with you and are trying to gently change some of that focus and at least allow for more flexibility in the near to midterm.
Yeah. So
I had no idea Chelsea was an Evo fan.
I mean, I like little torquey cars. How does this surprise you?
It totally fits in with you, but I've never heard you utter that phrase before, and I feel like, okay, now I get it.
I was asking him for an Evo long before an I-Miev.
Did I never pour you into the passenger seat of one of my Evos?
He never loved me enough.
No. I think
I can't even say that with
I think that my love was always to put you into a prototype of some electric car, and I
adored all my time in my little right-hand drive I-Miev with snow tires in Los Angeles.
Yep.
It was brilliant, and we enjoyed the absolute heck out of it.
Now, was that Mort? No, what was?
We had a couple of them. We had an 09 and a 2010 because the first one had to go back.
Yeah.
And I remember some conversation around.
That was Mort.
Yeah, there was a whole thing around because the 3-year NHTSA exemption and all of that. So after 3 years with prototypes, you have to crush it or get it out of the country. And I imagine there had to have been a conversation inside Mitsubishi of like, we're not crushing another one of Chelsea's electric cars. So you told me those cars went to Laos.
No, the second one went to Laos. The first one, actually, Chelsea, if you remember, we grabbed that one back to support Fukushima.
Ah,
we grabbed
even better.
Wow.
We grabbed every prototype that was anywhere that was accessible, and they all got on a boat and they went back to support the disaster relief in Fukushima. That was absolutely
far better use for it than me tooling around town.
Yeah. That's
wow.
Yeah, that was interesting. Those were interesting days.
Yes, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, David Patterson, thank you so much. I got to tell you, I learned crazy stuff I mean, great conversation. It was wonderful having you on the show.
Well,
And
thank you,
that's
Russell. This was a great deal of fun. This is if you go to Sweetie Thai and you see Dave and Chelsea sitting in a booth talking, eating Thai food, this is the conversation that you would hear.
I feel like
That's
I
pretty
was
much
there.
what we aim for. Truth in advertising, right?
I like that. This is the part of the show where we, if you get anything you want to plug, David, do you have a website or an organization?
Should everyone track you down on Twitter?
No. Obviously, if you want true information about what's going on with Chademo, is you go to chademo.com. They have some great presentations of their plans for the partnership with Choji, and there's some really good presentations, technical discussions, and that were released that show the development paths for the hoped Choji unification of the various fast charging standards. So that's Chademo.com, and there's an English version, and you can really see what's going on with the Chademo organization.
Cool.
We shotgun nerd out there.
Thank you so much. Chelsea, any final words?
No, just thank you as always to Dave for hanging out and being game and
Absolutely.
playing in our little experiment.
Thanks to all. Yeah, welcome to the tree. Thanks so much for watching another episode of Transport Treehouse, and we will see you very, very soon.